Continues psilocybin. After closing an early vote count deficit this week, it looks like Initiative 301 is set to pass with 50.6% of the vote. Patty Cahoon from Westward, this was a squeaker of a vote, one that when we went to sleep on Tuesday night, it did not look like 301 was going to pass, and they have yet to be made official, but all the votes have been counted. Did this one surprise you?
No, I think I actually said it was going to get it in a squeaker. And of course, I do reside in in an office where everyone was pro this vote. But my reporter who was there, I loved it. At 1 in the morning when they finally gave up because there weren't going to be no more results announced that night. And the supporters were still very optimistic, which is stoners are really tardy. They procrastinate. They forgot to vote till late, which in a lot of ways is probably true. And of course, given our amount of marijuana coverage, we know that stoner writers are also late too.
Michael Fields, Executive Director at Colorado Rising Actions. Great to have you back on the panel. Michael, is Denver more libertarian than we think it is?
I think it shows that. I mean, you look back, 2007, I think it was, it decriminalized weed to start with. It's kind of leading Colorado in that way. I was surprised, mainly because it had a comeback. I mean, I went to bed, I'm like, this thing lost. And, you know, I think this is really a solution looking for a problem. You know, this is something that, you know, isn't really, you have 10,000 cases of drug, you know, charges and 11 of them are about this. So I think, you know, I think you look at law enforcement, they're unsure what's going to happen. I think it could be a mess, you know, when you actually come to enforcement. But Denver is definitely leading the way in some kind of libertarian thinking.
Eric Sonderman, political analyst. Do you see any other cities looking at this either as motivation to square up and then say, well, let me make sure this doesn't happen in our city, or on the other side of things saying, hey, you know, maybe this is part of that, you know, making sure that prison overcrowding of all the different people who are in there for psychedelic mushrooms, all 11 of them have been charged, are not clogging up our judicial system. Where does this go from here?
I'm not sure other cities look to it, but the real thing is the city of Denver didn't look to it. A few people looked to it and petitioned it on the ballot, and Denver has easy ballot access to get stuff like this on the ballot. And there's no doubt in my mind that there'll be 5 people in Seattle or Portland, or, you know, who knows? It doesn't have to be just those hip cities. Maybe it's Columbus, Ohio, who put something like this on the ballot before too many years go by. I think it's great in the sense of the Denver brand was getting, you know, which is so heavy now around legalized pot, it needed a freshener. So now we have a brand freshener going on, and, you know, the late night talk show hosts can have some more fun at our expense.
Megan Schrader, editorial page editor at the Denver Post. We are certainly, as a city, no stranger to getting teased on late night talk show hosts. I think it was James Corden last night said that, you know, truly maybe recreational marijuana was a gateway drug. Now we're off to magic mushrooms. What do you think about the state of Denver's big vote on magic mushrooms?
It's certainly unique. I've never done shrooms, but I cannot imagine that they're anywhere close to the effect of marijuana, right? I think it's a whole new level up, the psychedelic effects of this drug. So if you're going to compare it to marijuana, I think it's a big leap. And thankfully, it's a big leap from this decriminalization to legalization, right? We're a long ways from that too.
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be any sort of mushroom shops open up anytime soon, but,
right.
but you never know. Yeah, people thought about pod maybe about 20 years ago, so we'll see.
Give it 5 years.
That's true. Red Rocks will never be the same. Denver's election day this week had the highest turnout since 1995 and set up a runoff election for many incumbents. Michael Hancock received 39% of the vote and will face Jamie Gillis, who drew 26% of the vote for mayor of Denver. 3 incumbent Denver City Council members, Mary Beth Sussman, Albus Brooks, and Wayne New, also face runoffs, as do the 2 open seats in Districts 1 and 3. Patty, you called this one. You had it almost down to the percentage point, so well done. I think your kiss of death election predictions that have been made years ago on the show, that era is over. Now you are the prognosticator in charge. Where do you think the runoff's going to go?
Well, what we can see from the fact that it's not just the Hancock runoff, but also in those city councils, there was definitely an anti-incumbent vote. There wasn't anyone but I think what we have to look at is Hancock, who got 38% of the vote, which meant that more than 61% are anyone but Hancock, or his slogan, "A city where everyone matters." Well, 61% think they don't matter in this city, and they voted for a variety of different candidates. I think if Jamie Gillis is really smart, she has been talking to Penn Tate and Lisa, and frankly, also Kaylin Heffernan, who really captured the spirit, if only 2% of the vote, of a lot of people in this city, and is talking to them about what can we do to really help people feel more engaged in this city, and is there a way we can kind of coalesce? I read Team of Rivals, that great book about when Lincoln set up his cabinet. We're not exactly in Land of Lincoln here, but there are ways that you can pull together. I mean, Penn, who sat around this table, who is a font of wisdom, who would be so useful in a new administration. Lisa Calderon's energy, again, Kaylin's energy, I mean, she's inspirational in a lot of ways. If Jamie Gillis is able to bring some of these people to the table with her, it's good for the city, and it's also good for her because she's a relatively unknown quantity. She's worked with different neighborhood groups like Golden Triangle, the Rhino Arts District, but that would help define her for a lot of people who don't know much about her.
Michael, when I looked at the number of incumbents facing runoffs, it made me think that jobs and growth and economic success does not necessarily beget voter satisfaction. Clearly, there is at least in if we want to call it the primary vote side of these things, that there are some Denverites out there that are at least angry enough to have a protest vote. Maybe these incumbents all pull it off. I'm not saying they're all going to lose, but there's a mood out there. How do you look at the number of incumbents facing runoffs? What's your reaction?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, you look at things are going pretty well. There is a boom in Denver and in Colorado in general, but some people get left behind in that. Some people don't like how neighborhoods changed, et cetera. And so you saw that discussed a lot. I think the turnout was interesting because 2 days before the election happened, it was the lowest turnout ever, and then it was the highest turnout that we got. And I think the thing we were talking about beforehand is, what is the runoff turnout going to look like? Is it going to be up? Is it going to be down because these incumbents are on? I think this is definitely a setback for Mayor Hancock. But it could be temporary. It could just be a little bit over a month here. Gillis, has to double her support while Hancock only needs 11%. There are people that are dissatisfied, but you have to get 70% of those other votes if you're Gillis, and I think that's hard to do when Hancock's going to have money. I think you're right that Gillis has to get Tate's support, Calderon's support really quickly. They need to be proactive during this next month in order to galvanize that support. So I think it's going to be a close race. I think that turnout, grassroots support, who can get those last doors in, but I would definitely put my money on Hancock.
Eric, I've been of the belief that the 4 weeks, sometimes 5, between this first election in Denver city politics to the runoff election can really be an entirely different campaign. You can't really bring a whole lot from those first 4 months to these 4 weeks. And I look back at when Hancock won his first term, he faced Chris Romer. They were neck and neck. I think we talked about before the show. Romer's at 28%, or maybe 28%, 27%, and James McKee at 26%. So I can't remember which one was first place, but it was very tight. And then Hancock ran away with it in the runoff. You've been there. What is this runoff season like for these candidates?
The difference between that race and this race is, in that race it was an open seat. John Hickenlooper was going away. In fact, Bill Vidal was the acting mayor at that point. Here we have an incumbent, and that changes the dynamic. I've been part of one of those as well, and this reminds me somewhat of 1995, now a quarter century ago, and Mary DeGroat and Wellington Webb. Yes, the race is about the incumbent, but I think the first round was more about the incumbent. And as Patty indicated, 62% of voters said anyone but. I think this race is in very large part about Jamie Gillis. I think it is about who Jamie Gillis is and who gets to define her. Does she get out to define herself, or does she let Hancock and all the Hancock forces define her? And trust me, they will do every effort, and it will start soon, and it will not be pretty to take the fight to her. One of the angles they'll run on is just lack of experience, and that one leaves me a little cold. I look around and say, she has as much experience as John Hickenlooper did when he became mayor back in '03. That seemed to work out reasonably well. Last I looked, he was running around Iowa and New Hampshire and whatever, and seeking the highest office in the land. This is a war about who Jamie Gillis is. Can she coalesce that other support? Can she grow that base? Can she define herself? I think everyone here expected a runoff, but all the conversation was whether Hancock goes into that runoff at 47, 48% in a very commanding position, per Michael's analysis, or whether Hancock goes into that runoff in the low 40s, 43, 44. No one, including, I believe, the Hancock forces, had a scenario in their mind where Hancock was going to enter this well under 40%. With that level of disconnect, this is a town open to change. The sale is on the table. The question is, can Jamie Gillis close the sale?
Megan, the Denver Post editorial page endorsed Michael Hancock in the initial campaign for the May 7th election day. Now that we're into a runoff campaign, I don't know how the Post approaches that, but how do you think it's going to differ from that initial six-way race now that's a two-person race?
I think we'll have to wait and see what happens through the campaign. You know, like Eric said, there's a campaign to be waged, and it'll be intense these next 4 weeks. And I think that for voters, they're going to have to weigh Jamie's credentials a little more than they did before the runoff, right? I think it's going to be interesting to see where they come down on, because clearly voters are not happy. A sizable portion of the Denver population has said something is amiss. It's impossible to speculate what that is, but surely growth and development has played a huge role in some of that. And so how Jamie is able to position herself as something different than Hancock on that issue will be critical, especially because she does come from a background of working with developers and development and public growth. So how she's able to say, this is how I would be different than the current administration, will be really key.
Mm-hmm. Initiative 300, an effort to reverse the city's 7-year-old urban camping ban, was rejected by Denver voters by a large margin, going down 83 to 17. A spokesman for the No on 300 campaign, Adina Vasquez, said the results were not a call for celebration, and although there is a problem with homelessness in the city, this wasn't a way to approach it. Michael, I think most folks saw that, especially with records being broken on the amount of spending on a Denver initiative against this initiative, that it was probably going to go down. But I'm not sure how many folks saw it going down 83-17. That is a significant beatdown. Did you see this coming? What do you think it says to this issue?
I think I saw it coming that it was going to lose like everybody else, but 83% is a huge margin. I mean, it's hard to get anything at 83%. You brought up, former Governor Hickenlooper. I remember back in 2005, he said that he had a 10-year plan to end homelessness in the city. I haven't seen him talking about that record that much on the campaign trail. But I think the important thing is this doesn't fix anything. This outcome doesn't fix the problem. We, again, have the #1 economy in the country. We still have a homelessness problem. We have an affordability and housing problem. And obviously, people didn't want to give up control of their public spaces in this way. But I think this is the time. There was a lot of money that was raised, over $2 million against this. Are people going to step up? And they talked about how we can do better. Are people going to step up and put some of that money towards more beds, job training, things that can actually help this problem?
That's a good point. Eric, what do you think? Do city leaders take this as a mandate from Denver voters saying, hey, we love the camping ban, leave it the way it is, or do they take it as like the slogan for the No on 300 campaign, we can do better? Do they go try to do better? Which mandate do you hear if you're at City Hall?
I'm not sure which mandate I hear. I think the camping ban is not in jeopardy, and something like the camping ban is probably going to remain in effect, and the notions of getting rid of it are gone. I think a lot of people are basing their analysis just based on the amount of money that the opposition spent here. And that was a factor, don't get me wrong. They spent a bunch of money. But when something loses at 80, I think it was 81 in the final analysis, doesn't matter, 81, 83%, whatever, it is more than just about campaign and campaign ads and campaign tactics. There is something fundamentally that voters said, we don't want to go that far. This was several bridges too far in terms of this ban. I don't know what to do, Dominic, with the whole homelessness issue. I mean, it is a scar on this city, but more than that, it's a scar on this nation. But it's growing and it seems intractable. It is a mistake to regard it as one problem because there are many problems enmeshed in it, and there are many different kinds of people who either choose to be homeless or are forced into homelessness. And a one-size-fits-all solution doesn't do it. I think there is a danger, and I think voters reflected that, of killing the goose here. I look at what's happening along the West Coast cities, LA, San Francisco, Portland, Seattle. There's a documentary out there by a TV station in Seattle called Seattle is Dying, hour-long documentary. I encourage viewers to Google it and watch it. And we're not Seattle or LA or Portland or any of those cities yet, but we're on that track in terms of the dimension of this homelessness issue. And I'll be damned if I have an answer.
Megan, I don't think anyone here expects you to have an answer to this, but what do you think, how do you think city officials are going to respond in trying to tackle this? Where do they take the conversation next?
So resources. I think that they have to throw resources at this issue. And my own preference, just based on what I know, what I've researched, is that housing first, right? If we're not going to let individuals camp on our public right-of-ways, if we're going to make that a criminal act, then we've got to find a way to provide them with housing. And there are numerous studies that indicate that housing first is effective. You know, not everyone will thrive in a situation where they're provided with housing and substance abuse treatment and job training, but a lot of people do thrive, and that is, I think, one solution. You know, and housing is not a shelter bed. I think that the folks who were behind the initiative on 300 made that point very clear, that these shelters it's not housing. It's a place where you can sleep and not violate the law. And we don't even have enough of those. So this administration, whoever is coming in following this runoff, needs to get really serious about throwing resources at housing.
Patty, a lot of the candidates we saw in this studio, both for city council and for mayor, not a whole lot of them were camping ban fans, but they said, or excuse me, not a whole lot of them wanted to back 300, but there was a mixed reaction on how to handle the camping ban. Some said, hey, let's repeal it, let's do something different. And there's a lot of energy around those campaigns, like Caitlin Heffernan, that talked about these issues, seeing that something needed to be done. Is there enough energy out there in the response to this kind of a drubbing that the camping ban can be modified?
There's a lot of energy, because some people just thought this was overkill, and they're like, how can we be mellow on mushrooms but so anti? It just seemed anti-people, almost 83%. If it was 63%, it would have been like, this was just a bad initiative that didn't make much sense. So first, we are going to see a lawsuit. There will be a lawsuit on the constitutionality of the camping ban. That is going to come. But to go off the we can do better, I moderated a panel where someone who was leading the no campaign said, well, we can't really answer the question of how we can do it better, because that's not what we're being paid for. Well, let's use the money that came. We should be talking for the next month in how we can do better. That doesn't mean there's one solution. There are many, many, many projects. Some are going to work, some aren't. They're being tried all over the country because this is a national problem. But this is another one where I would think Jamie Gillis, certainly Penn, who had a plan, she needs to step up and say, here's how we can do better. There's not one answer. John Hickenlooper learned that when he said we'd solve it in 10 years. But we need to deal with this, because if you look at what's happening on the streets of Denver, we look like a very inhumane city.
Tragedy struck a Colorado school again this week after two alleged gunmen opened fire at the STEM school and academy in Highlands Ranch. Kendrick Castillo died a hero in the shooting after lunging at one of the gunmen and saving many of his fellow students. At a vigil on Wednesday to commemorate his life and the survivors, a number of students walked out in frustration after perceiving the politicization of the event by speakers. Eric, this is yet one more tragic, violent headline that happens in Denver. But I guess what I take away from this so far is the people who do want to rush to a political corner that we've talked about on this show many times. Both of them have some questions right now. Folks didn't want to see it politicized on the gun control side, and folks who said, let's arm every school. There was a private security guard there, and there's an investigation going on how that security guard reacted. So there is no perfect solution, yet everybody wondering, Why here? Why again? As you see the things fall out this week, what's your reaction?
My reaction is obviously it was shocking again, but it was shocking for the event, and then it was shocking in the way of how little we're shocked anymore. That these things continue to be prevalent, they continue to happen. The question of why here, why the plethora of them in Denver or suburban Denver, I have no idea. I don't know that there's an explanation to it. I think your question, Dominic, is dead on in terms of everyone racing to their political corners. Good for those students who felt they were being used at some, I guess it was more of a vigil, but the vigil had elements of turning almost into a political rally. And good for those students standing up saying this is not about politics and not about speeches, this is about us. Obviously good for Kendrick Castillo, good for a couple of those other kids who took matters into their own hands, but how sad that we have kids who have to go to school thinking about self-defense. Shame on anyone who thinks there is a simple solution here, whether that is people on the right who reject gun control or some enhance gun control as being a part of that answer. Shame on people on the left who think that you can magically confiscate guns, which is not going to happen in this society, and that this problem would go away, because this is a deeper problem. And yes, it's about guns, but first and foremost, it's about culture and what kind of culture these kids are growing up in. It's like the homelessness issue before. There is not a simple answer, but we better come up with one, because what we're doing to this generation of kids, more psychologically, yes, one person very sadly lost their life, but the psychological piece of this is just horrific.
Megan, I can't even imagine where an editorial board starts in trying to look at this, but give us an insight to how you and your board take a look at something this tragic, but also this repetitive in our community.
So the editorial we wrote and the aftermath was focused entirely on Kendrick Castillo, his bravery, giving tribute to him, and giving the community time and space to grieve, because there will be time after the investigations are complete, after we've picked apart the shortcomings in the system that allowed this to happen. You know, what school administrators knew when they knew it, how they responded to it, you know, how those kids got those guns. You know, there will be time to do all of that, and there will be thorough reports, and then we can respond in a public policy way to ways that we can make this less likely to happen again. But for now, the editorial board it felt very strongly that it's just time to talk about Kendrick. What an amazing kid he was. Like, just heartbreaking that we lost him. And then there will be time to talk about all the other stuff.
Patty, might be this is something, I mean, 20 years ago at Columbine, now those students and their whole generation who have lived with lockdown drills are going to be part of the leadership in our society. Perhaps it's the kids who are now the adults who have lived with this last 20 years who might need one that makes the change, not the folks that came before.
Well, you have Patrick Neville, who was at Columbine, who's now in the Colorado legislature. You have Tom Sullivan, whose son died at the Aurora Theater shootings, who's there too. They disagree. The problem is there are so many different viewpoints on this, so many different possible solutions, but certainly talking about it in a studied way instead of the hysteria over Wednesday night when we really didn't need to hear from a congressman's wife when the kids wanted to talk. We've got to be sure we really analyze what's happening here.
Michael, wrap it up for us.
Well, I thought it was interesting, you know, the three images that were stuck in my head were the kids standing outside with the cops going by, very scared, very sad. You know, being a former teacher, that one really impacted me. The parents running to see, you know, is other kids okay or not? And then Kendrick Castillo's dad talking about how he's a hero. And I think this story should mainly be about Kendrick, and a vigil is not the place for politics during that time. There is policy discussions that have to happen, that should happen, but that's not the time or the venue for Senator Bennett or Congressman Crow to do that. So giving the kids time to grieve, obviously very unfortunate circumstance, and you know, hopefully it'll be the last one. I don't think that's the case, but hopefully it is that, and we need to, you know, continue to have this discussion long term.
We've been pretty chatty tonight, so we need to get to our disgrace so we can say something nice rather quickly. Patty, always start us off for your disgrace of the week.
Disgrace, we have less than 4 weeks till the next election. Let's be sure everyone focuses on issues and we don't have a lot of dirty tricks.
You're here. Michael.
The Harrison School District security guard was fired after yanking down a grandma to the ground. She was protesting Governor Polis after the event. So just freedom of speech is an important thing, and making sure that people are able to voice their opinion.
Eric.
It's not sports talk here, but the National Hockey League, in Game 7 for the ads, it says everything about this country right now, that they take away a goal based on a nitpicking technicality. We're a country these days of nitpicking technicalities.
Megan.
It has to be the school shooting, right? That occurred, that those kids did that. It's just unthinkable.
Time to see something nice. Patty.
To all the mothers out there, especially my mother, a very happy Mother's Day.
Here, here. Michael.
Patty stole mine, but Teacher Appreciation Week, so all the teachers out there, thank you for the hard work that they do.
Eric.
Well, ditto on Mother's Day. How about Penn Tate and Lisa Calderon? They've made long-term contributions to this city. They put themselves forward when others didn't to run for the mayor of Denver. They're credible candidates. They have contributions left, and well done to both of them.
Megan.
I have to give credit to Brandon, and I'm going to butcher his last name. I think it's Bailey, who also helped Kendrick rush the assailants. And he was just so well spoken in his press conference, and just such an impressive kid.
I can't echo all that more. Hearing those kinds of comments, and frankly, the candor and aplomb that students who had just gone through something like that could talk about their heroic fellow student in Kendrick. I'm not going to pass I'm not going to pass up the opportunity that Patty said. Happy Mother's Day to my mom as well. So happy Mother's Day from your favorite kid, and to my sister and brother. Hey, get your own TV show. You can say Happy Mother's Day on that one. That is all the time we have for this episode of Colorado Inside Out. For everyone here at CPT 12, I'm Dominic Duzzuti. Thank you very much for watching. Good night.
Well done.